Montana Territory, 1878, the first time Vaughn Jensen saw the cowboy. She had just been thrown out of the mercantile for talking too much about things no one wanted to hear: railroad contracts, the price of oats, and why women should be allowed to own land without needing a husband's name on the deed. She hit the ground hard, dust clung to her skirt and the side of her face. But before she could push herself up, a strong hand reached down to help her. "You all right, miss?" the cowboy asked, voice slow and steady like the Missouri in spring. She blinked up at him. His hat shaded a face that looked carved from the land itself: sun-browned skin, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of worn denim. He was tall, broad, and quiet. She could already tell. The quiet ones always thought she talked too much. "I am now, thanks," Vaughn said, brushing off her skirt as she stood. "Though seems some folks around here think a woman with opinions is a threat to the moral fabric of the town." He chuckled, low and warm. "Maybe it is, but I like the sound of your voice. Keep talking." She blinked. "What?" I said. "Keep talking." He tipped his hat. "You say things worth hearing." That was how she met Yates Kessler. He was passing through town with a wagon load of feed and a tired horse. She found out later he ran cattle east of the Bitterroots, out near a bend in the river where the pines grew thick and the grass stayed green longer than most places. Vaughn had never met a man like him. Not just because he listened, but because he listened like it mattered. "People say I talk too much to be a wife," she told him 2 days later while sitting on a crate outside the post office. "They say no man wants a woman with too many words." Yates leaned against the hitching post, arms folded across his chest. He watched her with that steady look of his, like nothing she said could scare him off. "Then they do not know what they are missing," he said. She laughed, surprised, and something in her chest loosened. Vaughn lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of town, just past the schoolhouse. Her parents had been gone 6 years now. Fever took her mother, a mine shaft collapse her father. She kept busy with work, sewing and cleaning for the schoolteacher, sometimes helping the doctor with translating letters or tending to patients when he was too tired to stand. But no one stayed long in her life. Not once they realized she was not quiet, not soft in the way women were supposed to be. She never married. Not because she did not want to, but because every time she tried, they asked her to shrink, to hush, to be less. Yates never asked her to be less. He came back to town every few weeks, and when he did, he always found her. They would sit under the cottonwoods near the river or walk the edge of her property as she talked about everything from irrigation to the way the stars shifted depending on the season. He listened like it was all new to him, like he had been waiting years just to hear her thoughts. One afternoon, she found him waiting outside the schoolhouse, arms crossed, jaw tight. "What happened?" she asked. He nodded toward the building. 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Someone left them out by the road west of town. Sheriff figured they were abandoned. No name, no note, nothing. Vaughn's heart clenched. "Are they all right?" He nodded. "Scared, hungry, but fine." She stepped closer. "What will happen to them?" "They will get passed around, probably." "Folks always say they will help, but no one wants the burden." Vaughn's eyes narrowed. "They are not burdens." "I know," Yates said. "That is why I am telling you." They walked to the back of the schoolhouse where the children sat under a blanket. The girl was maybe 5, the boy a little older. Both with dark, tangled hair, wide eyes, and faces too solemn for their age. The boy stood when Yates and Vaughn approached. "I am Rylan," he said, chin lifted. "And she is Ree. We are not scared." Vaughn knelt, meeting his eyes. "I believe you." Ree clung to her older brother's hand but peeked out with curiosity. Yates crouched beside them. "You two have anywhere to go?" "No," Rylan said, "but I can take care of her." "No doubt you can," Yates said. Then he looked at Vaughn. "But maybe. You don't have to do it alone." Vaughn's heart stilled, then picked up in a different rhythm. She looked at Yates, then the children, then back again. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying," Yates said, "we could take them in, together." Her mouth fell open. "But we are not. We could be," he said quietly. She stared at him. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you care. I know your heart is bigger than this town. And I know I have never wanted to hear someone talk more in my life." She laughed, tears springing to her eyes. You are serious. I am. She looked down at Rylan and Ree. They were watching her, hope flickering behind the guardedness. All right, she said. All right? Yates asked. Yes, she said. Let us do it. Yates stood and offered her his hand. This time when she took it, it was not just to get off the ground. It was to start something new. They brought the children back to her cabin. It was small but clean and warm. Yates stayed that night, sleeping on a cot near the fireplace. Vaughn braided Ree's hair and made cornbread with what little she had. Rylan sat by the fire, eyes fixed on Yates like he was already deciding whether to trust him. That night, after the children were asleep, Vaughn poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to Yates. They sat outside on the porch. I do not know what kind of mother I will be, she said softly. I have not had much practice. You are already doing better than most, Yates said, taking a sip, and you will not be doing it alone. She looked over at him. We are really doing this, huh? He nodded. We are, she smiled. I talk too much, you know. He turned toward her, eyes steady. Then keep talking. I want to hear every word. And in the quiet that followed, something warm settled between them, something steady, something real, something that felt like the beginning of love. The wind came down from the mountains that morning, sharp with pine and snowmelt, tugging at the edge of Vaughn's shawl as she leaned over the fence Yates had built the day before. The boards were rough but solid, the kind of work done by a man who knew how to make things last. Ree chased a chicken across the yard, her laughter rising into the air like smoke off a warm pan, while Rylan crouched near the woodpile, carving a piece of soft pine with focused, careful hands. Yates set the last post and wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve. They're settling in. They are, Vaughn said, her voice quiet. She didn't take her eyes off the children. He stepped beside her, close enough she could feel the heat off his arm. You're watching like you expect it to disappear. I've known too many things that did, she said. He didn't answer right away, just leaned forward, resting his arms on the top rail. I was 10 when my father left, she glanced at him. Did he come back? No, my ma kept the ranch going by herself till I was old enough to ride fence. She never spoke a bitter word about him. Just said some men carry storms inside. Vaughn looked back at Rylan, who had started lining up the carved shavings like little soldiers. I won't let them grow up waiting for someone who won't come. They won't have to. He said it like a promise, not loud, not dramatic, just solid, like earth. Inside, the cabin smelled of salt pork and dried sage. Vaughn set the pot on the stove and stirred the stew, careful not to wake Ree, who had curled up beneath the quilt in the corner. The girl had fallen asleep mid-sentence, her small body worn out from chasing chickens and hauling kindling. Rylan perched on the bench near the hearth, peeling an apple with the knife Yates had given him. His eyes followed the blade like he was memorizing the shape of danger. She sleeps better now, he said without looking up. I noticed, Vaughn said. I think it's the quiet. She used to cry every night, he paused. She thought I didn't hear. Vaughn turned from the stove. You don't have to keep carrying it all yourself. She's my sister. And now she's ours. He looked up then, and something eased in his face, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. Later, after the stew was eaten and the children tucked in, Vaughn stepped onto the porch with Yates, each holding a mug of boiled coffee. The stars were out, sharp and cold above the pines. I've never had a man build a fence for me, she said, half smiling. I've never known a woman who needed one but built everything else herself. A silence stretched between them, not awkward, just full. There's land west of here, Yates said after a while, along the ridge, good soil, plenty of grazing. I've been thinking about building there, she glanced at him. You'd leave your place near the river, he nodded. It's too far to ride back and forth every day, and I don't see much sense in keeping 2 homes when one would do. She felt her breath catch. Are you asking me to move with you? I'm asking if you'd want to build something together. Her heart beat slow and heavy in her chest. She stared out at the trees, the way the moonlight silvered the tops of the pines. I've never planted roots with anyone before. Then maybe it's time, she turned to him. I'll come, but I'm bringing my books, my loud opinions, and every one of my stubborn thoughts, he grinned. That's what I'm counting on, she laughed, a soft, surprised sound. You're not afraid of hard things, are you? I've found the best things usually are. And in the hush that followed, Vaughn reached out and took his hand. Not to steady herself, not to ask for anything, just to say yes. The wagon creaked under the weight of their belongings, bundles of bedding. A crate of dry goods, Vaughn's sewing machine lashed beneath a canvas tarp, and the small cedar trunk where Ree now kept her dolls. Yates led the team, reins firm in his hands while Vaughn sat beside him, her skirt tucked under her legs to keep the hem from catching dust. Rylan rode the mare ahead, alert and straight-backed, scanning the path like he'd been born to scout ridge lines. The sun climbed slow, casting long bars of light through bare-limbed cottonwoods. Spring had started to wake the land, new shoots pushing up through the thawed earth, the scent of turned soil rising with the breeze. The trail west took them along the edge of a shallow creek, then lifted into hills where the trees grew closer, darker. How much farther? Vaughn asked, shading her eyes. Couple more hours, Yates said. We'll reach the south pasture by dusk, settle in at the bunkhouse for now. Cabin won't be ready for another week or so, she glanced at him. You built a bunkhouse, he nodded once. Just a simple one-room with a stove and bunks. Enough to get us through while the rest goes up. You planned all that without saying a word. He didn't look at her, but his voice held a rough kind of warmth. Didn't want to ask you to start something without giving you a place to stand. Vaughn folded her hands in her lap, quiet for a stretch. I've never had a man clear space for me before. You've cleared enough for others. They didn't speak again until the trees thinned and the land opened into a wide basin ringed with hills. The grass there was knee-high, soft as a whisper in the wind. A modest structure stood near the tree line, smoke curling from the stovepipe. Beyond it, a half-built frame reached toward the sky post set, rafters in place, the bones of a house rising from the ground. Ree stirred in the wagon bed, rubbing her eyes. Are we here? Vaughn turned. We are. Inside the bunkhouse, the air smelled of sawdust and iron. There were 4 bunks built into the walls, a table near the stove, and a row of hooks where coats could hang. Rylan leaned his rifle against the doorframe and began unpacking without being asked. Yates brought in the last of the crates and set them beside the hearth. We'll get the stove hot, then I'll check the cattle. I've been letting them graze the upper slope. Ree tugged at Vaughn's sleeve. Can I help? Vaughn knelt beside her. You can help me string the lanterns. We'll need light soon. While Yates rode out to the higher pasture, Vaughn and the children turned the bunkhouse into something close to a home. Rylan found a shelf of old books Yates had left behind, mostly about horses and fencing techniques, and arranged them by size. Ree laid out the quilt Vaughn had stitched during the winter, placing her dolls along the edge like sentinels. That night, they ate by lantern glow salted rabbit and onions, with boiled cornmeal cakes cooked flat on the stove. The cabin frame loomed outside the window, silent and waiting. Rylan scraped the last of his plate and looked toward the door. Will we stay here always? Yates set down his tin cup. That's up to all of us. Vaughn met Rylan's eyes. Do you want to? The boy didn't answer right away. Then I think I could. Ree leaned against Vaughn's side, already drifting toward sleep. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Yates stood outside, sharpening a blade by moonlight. Vaughn stepped onto the porch, her shawl drawn tight. You're building more than a house out there, she said. He paused, the whetstone still in his hand. I know, she watched his face, the way the shadows played along the line of his jaw. Why me, Yates? You could have chosen a woman who doesn't argue with every man in town. I didn't want someone easy, he said. I wanted someone real. Someone who'd argue with me if I deserved it. She stepped closer. You're not afraid of being challenged. I'm afraid of building a life that don't have room for truth. Vaughn reached for his hand, calloused and warm. I've never known a man who saw me and didn't want to change what he saw. I don't want to change you, he said, voice low. I want to build with you. The silence between them deepened, not from distance but from understanding. In that quiet, Vaughn rested her forehead against his chest, and he held her like he'd known how to all along. The stars wheeled overhead, and the land stretched out around them, vast and waiting. Neither of them said another word, because for the first time there was nothing left to prove and nothing left to fear. By the third week on the new land, the walls of the cabin were up, roof half-shingled, smoke already curling from the stone chimney Yates had laid by hand. He worked in quiet rhythm, measuring timber, setting beams, moving with the surety of someone who understood that permanence didn't come from words but from what a person was willing to build with their own two hands. Vaughn spent the mornings planting along the slope behind the house, digging narrow trenches for seed potatoes, squash, and beans. The ground there was richer than she expected, dark with ash from some long-ago fire. Ree tottered after her with an apron full of onion sets, handing one at a time like they were precious stones. Rylan had taken it upon himself to mark the fence lines with fresh paint, using a brush Yates had carved from hog bristle and pine. One afternoon, Vaughn brought Yates water while he worked on the loft ladder. She stood just below him, watching the way the muscles in his arms flexed as he drove the nails in clean and slow. "You ever get tired of building?" she asked. He didn't look down. "Only when I'm not building something worth keeping." She shaded her eyes. "You think this is?" "I know it is." She handed him the tin cup. "I've been thinking about starting a garden behind the barn. If I can get enough growing, I might trade down in town. There's a woman near the creek who's been asking about herbs for teas." He drank deep, then passed the cup back. "You think you'll want to go back often?" "Not much," she said. "Not unless I have to." He looked at her then. "That bad?" "No," she said, "just. I don't miss being looked through." Yates set the hammer aside and stepped down the unfinished ladder until he stood beside her on the packed dirt floor. "You're not invisible here. I know." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You've never been." That night, a storm rolled in from the north. The wind came first, low and heavy through the trees, followed by a sharp crack of thunder that sent Ree running straight into Vaughn's lap. Yates lit the lanterns and checked the windows while Rylan bolted the door like Yates had shown him. "We're safe," Vaughn whispered against Ree's hair. "Storms sound worse than they are." Ree looked up, eyes wide. "Will the house blow away?" "No," Yates said from across the room. "It's anchored clean to the earth. Nothing's taking it." They all slept in the same room that night, the children curled on the pallet near the hearth, Vaughn and Yates sitting side by side on the edge of the bed frame. Neither spoke for a long while. The wind rattled the shutters, but inside the warmth held. "You want children of your own?" Vaughn asked, eyes on the glowing coals. His voice was steady. "I think I already have them." She turned her head. "That's not what I meant." "I know." She studied him in the firelight. "You could still leave, Yates. You're not locked into this." "I wouldn't know how to leave," he said. "Not anymore." Ree stirred in her sleep, and Vaughn reached for the quilt, draping it over the girl's narrow shoulders. "I never imagined it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like staying might be the bravest thing I've ever done." The wind quieted just before dawn, and when light broke over the ridge, the trees glittered with fresh rain. Vaughn stepped outside alone, drawing her shawl close, watching the mist rise from the ground like breath. She hadn't spoken a single word yet that morning, and somehow, it felt like she didn't have to. Behind her, the door opened, and Yates joined her without saying anything. He stood beside her, hands tucked into the front pockets of his trousers, boots damp from the floorboards where he'd stepped barefoot. She looked up at him. "You know that people still say I talk too much. I hope they keep saying it," he said. "Means you're still you." She laughed, not loud but honest. "Say something now," he said. "Anything?" She tilted her head, thoughtful. "I think I want a milk cow and a coop big enough for 12 hens. I want to build a little bench under the window in the kitchen, and I want to teach Ree how to write her name in ink. I want to plant fennel this year and see if it takes. I want to sleep beside you without wondering when it'll end. And I want to be old with you, Yates Kessler." I want to be old and wrinkled and still talking your ear off while you build something that doesn't need building." He reached for her hand. "Then we'll do all that," he said, and she believed him. Not because he said it, but because he already had. The cabin was finished by midsummer. The last shingle was laid under a sky the color of worn bone, and the final hinge set on the front door just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Vaughn stood in the threshold with her sleeves rolled and her hands dusted in flour, watching Yates test the latch one last time. "It's quiet," she said, her voice low. Yates straightened, wiping his palms on his trousers. "You expected noise. I expected something louder when you finish building the shape of your life." He stepped inside and looked around, eyes tracing the lines of the room. "It'll get louder once the winter comes. Cracking beams, wind down the chimney, children fighting over who gets the warm spot near the stove." She smiled. "I hope so." That night they slept beneath a roof that no longer had gaps, with the fire banked and the children tucked in the loft above. Ree had strung a daisy chain over the railing, and Rylan had carved their initials into the edge of the hearthstone, a small, slanted R and a smaller R beside it. Vaughn traced the letters in the firelight, then turned to Yates, who was watching her from the rocker. "I wasn't sure I'd ever have a home that felt like mine," she said. "You made this one," he said. "We made it." He nodded, slow. "You still thinking about teaching?" "I've been thinking about starting with Rylan. He reads well enough, but he's never written more than his name. Thought I might show him how to keep a ledger. Might be useful if he ever wants land of his own." "He's got a head for figures," Yates said, "and a good eye. He noticed a sick cow before I did yesterday, said its gait was off." "He's sharp," Vaughn said. "But he's still holding his breath, waiting for it all to fall through. He'll stop. When we've stayed long enough." The next day, Vaughn rode into town for the first time in weeks. She hitched the wagon near the blacksmith and stepped into the dry goods store with a list tucked in her apron. The shopkeep barely looked her way, but when she asked for roofing nails and barley seed, he didn't question it. She left with a sack of flour, a spool of thread, and a single letter addressed in a hand she didn't recognize. She waited until she was back in the wagon to open it. The paper smelled of coal smoke and rust, and the ink had bled in the corners from damp. Inside was a brief message from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in years, a woman named Hester who'd married a miner and now ran a boarding house in Butte. She'd heard Vaughn had taken in children, and she wanted to know if there was need for a winter coat or extra blankets. She had 5 now and a loom that still worked. When Vaughn got home, she folded the letter and tucked it inside the cedar box where she kept bits of cloth and old buttons. That night, she told Yates about it while they shelled beans on the front step. "I never expected anything from her," she said. "Sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes." He leaned back on his palms, sleeves rolled, eyes half closed against the last of the sun. "You ever think about marrying again?" She didn't answer at first. The beans clicked into the bowl between them. "I've thought about it," she said finally. Yates nodded. "What about you?" she asked. "I've thought about it every day since the first time you told some fool off in front of the mercantile." She laughed, and the sound came easy this time, without apology. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a ring, simple, silver, the edges worn smooth. "My ma's," he said. "She wore it until the day she died. I figure she'd want it passed on." Vaughn ran her thumb over the band. "You sure?" "I'm sure of you." She didn't hesitate. She slipped the ring on and stood, brushing off her skirt. "Then so am I." They were married a week later, right there beside the creek that ran past the pasture. Ree picked wildflowers and scattered them in the shallows, and Rylan wore a vest too big for him, shoulders stiff with pride as he stood at Yates's side. The preacher from town came out in his wagon, and when he asked if anyone objected, no one so much as shifted. Vaughn wore her mother's kerchief and a dress she'd sewn herself, pale blue with a calico hem. Yates said his vows like he was laying bricks firm, deliberate, unshakable. She answered just as steady. They didn't have music, only the sound of the creek and the wind in the cottonwoods, but it was enough. That night, they danced in the clearing while the children laughed and chased fireflies. Yates held her with both hands at her waist, no steps, no rhythm, just swaying. "You ever think you'd get here?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "But I'm glad I did." He kissed her then, slow and certain, and when he pulled back, she didn't speak. She only held his gaze like the world had finally stilled around them. That fall, the rains came late, and the harvest was better than they'd hoped. Ree learned to read her name in Vaughn's neat hand, and Ryland started keeping track of the cattle in a small ledger he carved from scrap wood. Yates built a smokehouse behind the barn, and Vaughn began dyeing cloth with onion skins and walnut husks, her fingers stained and busy most mornings. They slept each night with the windows open until the frost came, and even then they kept the shutters cracked just enough to hear the night. By winter, the family had settled into a rhythm quiet, close, and full of small, certain joys. Yates rose before dawn to check the animals, and Vaughn lit the stove and warmed the bread she'd set to rise the night before. The children woke slowly, always together, always with the kind of peace that comes from knowing no one was going anywhere. And when the snow came down in thick silence, blanketing the roof and softening the world, they stayed close by the fire, reading aloud, sewing, and listening to the wind pass harmlessly by. Vaughn no longer feared losing what she had. She'd built it with her hands and her will, and Yates had met her there, brick for brick, word for word. They were not loud people, but their love filled the space between them like breath fills lungs, necessary, quiet, and constant. They grew old there, side by side. And when the days stretched out slow and sweet, and the fire burned low, they still reached for each other, still listened, still stayed, always.